Ahoy! My name is Klara and I have a passion for naval history. As a result of this passion, I wrote a thesis for an annual competition called High School Academic Activity, which is held in my country, Czechia. In the competition, I have to present my work in a short presentation, and I thought that it is not a bad idea to share this presentation with you. So let me introduce you to my thesis called From Trafalgar to Jutland, Evolution of a Royal Navy between 1805 and 1916 and its influence on the development of a modern world. Since there is no comprehensive overview of activities of Royal Navy in 19th century in Czech language, I decided to map these activities and put them into one publication. On the particular examples, I also wanted to prove the claim that Royal Navy in 19th century did influence the development of a modern world. And what do I mean by 19th century? As we all know, definition of 19th century in history varies. In history classes here in Czechia, we are taught that 19th century starts with the French Revolution and ends at the beginning of World War I. And since this century is sometimes called the Age of Steam, at least here, it is, some people count it from James Watt's improvement of a steam engine. Yet I am a naval historian, and thus my definition of 19th century is a little different. In naval history, we start 19th century with probably the best known naval battle in history, the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. This absolute victory solidified British naval supremacy and allowed Britain to rule the waves, as it is sung in the iconic British song Rule Britannia, Rule the Waves. Subsequently, the Battle of Trafalgar created the 19th century as we know it today. And 19th century in naval history also ends when British naval supremacy ends. The embodiment of this end is the largest naval battle of World War I, the Battle of Jutland from year 1916. Thus, for me, 19th century ends with that battle. 19th century was a century of great technological progress. The Industrial Revolution, which began in Great Britain, initiated these changes, but was also fueled by them. Therefore, during 19th century, sails were replaced by steam power, and wooden ships were at first sheeted with iron, and at the end of the century, ships were built entirely out of it. Throughout the century, new types of ships were developed. The most known of these have been the submarines. Main body of the war fleet at the beginning of World War I was composed from the formidable battleships called dreadnoughts. Royal Navy of Jutland was thus completely differently armed than the Royal Navy from Trafalgar. Could you now try to find a few small differences between the warship from Trafalgar and from Jutland? Thanks to the naval supremacy acquired after Trafalgar, Royal Navy patrolled on every sea and kept order on the global stage. Subsequently, the time of relative peace in 19th century had been called Pax Britannica, or the peace dictated by Britain. In that period, every world's political, economic and other activity had to be approved by Great Britain. And this approval was, of course, maintained by the Royal Navy. There are a number of examples of this, and in order to make this video on an acceptable length, let's look at the four most interesting. In 1827, thanks to the intervention of Royal Navy and a subsequent Battle of Navarino, the Greece had been enabled to get independence from the Ottoman Empire. And in 1839, when China, in order to stop British opium trade, cut all economic ties with Britain, the Royal Navy sent a squadron of its ships to open the trade by any means. Thanks to the effective usage of gunboats in the preceding war with China, this type of diplomacy have been named the gunboat diplomacy. And Royal Navy also helped to win the Crimean War, and therefore stop the Russian expansion to Europe. The effective British blockade of Russian ports and systematic bombardment of Russian naval defenses completely dried up the Russian economy, so they were forced to sue for peace. And last but not least, thanks to the hard and lengthy work of African Squadron of Royal Navy, prolonged over the entire 19th century, it was possible to effectively counter brutal practices of slave ships and destroy the maritime slave trade. The beginning of 20th century saw first theoretical works in the field of naval strategy and tactics. Book written by Alfred Thayer Mahan, Influence of a Sea Power Upon History, had immensely contributed to the naval arms race between Great Britain and Germany at the dawn of World War I. The so-called fleet in being strategy revolutionized the thinking of naval commanders. They now kept a mighty battle fleets fitted for combat, which hadn't fought but only kept the enemy in check. Thus, even when Britain expected that in World War I she will win a new Trafalgar, changes in tactics and strategy prevented that. At the same time, two energetic people had met on Admiralty, Admiral John J. Kingfisher and the young Winston Churchill. Both profoundly contributed to the modernization of armaments and structures of Royal Navy. The World War I was also the first war which was fought on the sea, but also under the sea. While the surface fleets were executing the fleet in being strategy, German submarine warfare meant completely new type of naval fight. The type which Royal Navy hadn't been able to use, even though they had in their arsenals the most technologically advanced submarines in the world. One British admiral even said that the submarines are unfair and damned un-English. Yet the submarines' attacks on the mercantile vessels became a common in war, which perfectly demonstrates the known example of sinking of the British ocean liner RMS Lusitania, where a lot of civilians, even from neutral countries, perished. My work ends up with Battle of Jutland in 1916, which had not become a new Trafalgar and ended up indecisively. Yet still, I was able to prove that Royal Navy in 19th century had influenced a development of the modern world. 19th century was a tumultuous time, and a lot changed in this century. Royal Navy herself went from the period of her greatest successes after Battle of Trafalgar through the times of absolute dominance to the decline in World War I. Yet even through all of that, she always fulfilled her duties, and she does that up until today. That is most perfectly illustrated by this quote from the website of Royal Navy. We help to stabilize the seas, keeping the maritime trade that is the lifeblood of the UK economy flowing. We act as a guardian and diplomat, as a humanitarian force for good, and peacekeeper on the global stage. So that's it for today. I hope you at least a bit enjoyed this, and if you did, please like this video. And if you like my content in general, please consider subscribing. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time with whatever idea I will come up with. Bye!